Here you go. Want to eat? There's definitely a reason that the Catholic Church used to have such a rigorous canonization process for saints. It's extremely hard to be 100% sure that someone practiced the virtues of faith, hope, and charity to a heroic degree. Did everything they say align with Catholic doctrine? And if not, did they recant their heresy? It takes quite an exhaustive investigation to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that they were without error. Meanwhile, there are many poor souls who take everything Catholic influencers say at face value. Now, I'm not discouraging you from watching them on YouTube. I'm just saying you should cultivate a healthy scrutiny of all those claiming to educate you about the faith, including me.
The Catholic Men's Podcast, helping you find good works of literature for the Catholic gentleman.
Is the channel run by artificial intelligence? Is the person obsessed with money or fame? It's something to think about. Don't canonize anyone just because they're famous or have a lot of subscribers. Sanctity and right teaching is much more than having followers. Our Lord only had 12, and he was the Son of God. Look to the great St. John Bosco for an example of a humble saint. He had over 100 mystical dreams, and in many cases was commanded from above to relate them to his students. This is a man who had his hand severely burned in the vision of hell, but even with all of the overwhelming evidence of authenticity, he still said, "This was a dream, and no one is obliged to believe it." I have noticed, however, that those who have asked me for explanations have accepted my suggestions in good part. Nevertheless, do as St. Paul says, "Probate spiritus et quod bonum est tenete." Test all things, hold fast that which is good. Another thing that I would not want you to forget is to pray for your poor Don Bosco, lest the words of St. Paul, "After preaching to others, I myself should be rejected," may apply to me. That is, after preaching to you, I may end up with the damned. Now that's the mark of a humble man with a love for the truth, not like some of these influencers today. There were plenty of celebrity Catholics in the past whom everyone regarded as saints, but then were discovered to be just the opposite, which brings me to the story of Pelagius, which I found in the Catechist, a compilation of true stories from Catholic literature by Canon G.E. Howe. A young man named Pelagius led in his father's house a life so exemplary that everyone regarded him as a saint. He lived so for several years. After the death of his parents, he sold all his goods, distributed the proceeds amongst the poor, and retired to a desert, where he led a most edifying life. But one day he had the misfortune to consent to a bad thought. He had not the courage to confess it for fear of losing the good opinion of his confessor, and fell into a deep melancholy. Meanwhile, his angel guardian appeared to him visibly under the figure of a pilgrim, and said to him, "Go, Pelagius, confess thy sin, and God will forgive thee, and thou shalt recover the peace of thy soul." Thus warned, Pelagius took the resolution of doing penance, flattering himself that God would perhaps forgive him his sin without his confessing it. In that hope, he entered a monastery, where he led a most austere life in fasting and continual penance. Finding himself at the hour of death, he confessed for the last time, still without daring to confess his hidden sin. Everyone thought him a saint, and he was buried with honor. But what was the result? 3 days in succession, his body was found outside the grave, without anyone knowing how it came there. The last time it happened, the superior went thither with all his monks, and addressing the dead body, he said aloud, "Pelagius, thou didst obey me when alive. Obey me now when thou art dead. Tell me in God's name whether it be his will that thou art buried in some other place." "Alas," cried the dead man, "I am damned for having concealed in confession a bad thought on which I had dwelt with pleasure. Behold the state in which my body is." At the same moment, his body appeared all on fire like red-hot iron. The sight terrified everyone present, and the superior caused Pelagius to be buried outside the cemetery of the monastery. So especially don't canonize anyone based on their follower count. And even if everything they say is correct, we should be extra careful not to fall into the sin of pride. In one of St. John Bosco's dreams, he overheard demons plotting to destroy his Salesian society. A devil shouted, "Listen to me carefully," convinced them that their main glory should consist in their learning. This means inducing them to study for the sake of study, learning for the sake of attaining fame, and not for the sake of practicing what they preach, and not for using their learning for the benefit of their neighbor. No more long hours in the confessional. They will hold on to preaching only, but very occasionally, in a form well measured and sterile, because it will only be an outlet for their own vanity in trying to be praised by their listeners and not to save their souls. The devil was basically trying to turn them into celebrity priests, God forbid. Follow a priest because he's holy, not because he's well-spoken. I'll always remember one of my favorite sermons was from a priest who stuttered, but he still got the point across beautifully. Remember what it says in Psalm 113. It sums everything up. "Not to us, O Lord, not to us, but to thy name give glory." Thank you all so much for watching. God bless you, and Our Lady keep you.